The wind screamed through the valley, carrying the kind of cold that bit through skin and bone. It had been snowing for 3 straight days, and the small frontier town was trapped under a thick white blanket. Horses stood shaking in the stables, smoke curled weakly from chimneys, and people stayed behind closed doors, waiting for the storm to pass. No one wanted to risk their lives in weather like this. Late one afternoon, a rider from the nearby Apache camp arrived at the town's edge. He was half frozen, his face hidden under a fur hood. He shouted for help, saying the chief's daughter was trapped under a broken wagon deep in the pass. Her legs were crushed and she could not move. But when the townsfolk heard that name, Apache, they stepped back. The old fear returned. They whispered to each other that it was too dangerous, that the tribe might think it was a trick. The rider begged, but no one answered. The sheriff folded his arms, saying it wasn't their fight. The blacksmith muttered that it was a death wish to go there in such a storm. Even the doctor, who once claimed he would help anyone, turned away. Standing at the edge of the crowd was a quiet cowboy named Luke Tanner. He didn't talk much, didn't drink much either. Most people thought he was strange because he lived alone near the foothills, fixing fences, tending cattle, and spending his nights by the fire with only his horse for company. No one really knew his story. Some said he was a soldier once. Others said he lost his family out west and came here to forget. Whatever the truth was, Luke didn't say. He just worked hard and stayed out of trouble. When he heard the words "paralyzed chief's daughter," something stirred in him. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was duty, or maybe he just couldn't stand seeing everyone turn their backs. He didn't speak a word. He just went to the stable, tightened the saddle on his horse, Dusty, packed a blanket, a small lantern, and a flask of water. Before anyone could stop him, he mounted and rode straight into the white storm. The wind was sharp enough to cut. Snow whipped against his face, and his horse struggled to see the trail. Luke kept his head down, his eyes squinting against the ice. Every few minutes he stopped to look for tracks, but they were buried. He rode for hours, his fingers stiff, his breath turning to frost in the air. Somewhere in the middle of that endless white, he thought he saw movement, a broken wagon lying on its side, half covered by snow. He jumped down, boots sinking deep. There, under the wreckage, lay a young woman. Her dark hair was tangled with ice, her face pale, lips blue. She was still conscious, her eyes full of pain and pride. She looked at him with confusion and fear. "Go," she said weakly. "They will kill you if they find you here." Her voice trembled, but her spirit was strong. Luke didn't answer. He knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. Her legs were twisted beneath the wood, and she winced when he touched them. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You're safe now." He used his knife to cut through the broken harnesses and wooden pieces. When he finally freed her, she cried out softly but bit her lip to stop herself from showing weakness. Luke lifted her gently, wrapping her in his thick coat. She was lighter than he expected, fragile like a bird. Yet something in her eyes told him she wasn't someone who gave up easily. He placed her across his saddle and climbed up behind her, holding her steady as he turned the horse around. The wind grew worse on the way back. Snow blinded him and the trail disappeared completely. More than once he almost lost his balance, but he kept going. Every time the woman's head fell against his chest, he spoke softly to keep her awake. "Stay with me," he said. "We're almost there." She whispered something in her own tongue, a word he didn't understand, and then fell silent again. By the time they reached his small cabin, Luke's hands were numb and the horse was shaking from exhaustion. He carried her inside, laid her near the fireplace, and worked fast to start a fire. The warmth filled the room slowly, but it wasn't enough. He took off her wet clothes carefully, leaving her wrapped in dry blankets, then poured warm water into a tin cup and held it to her lips. She sipped weakly, eyes half open. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me?" Luke didn't look at her right away. He just said, "Because no one else would." For hours he tended to her wounds. He used what little medicine he had, some herbs and a bit of whiskey to clean the cuts. He saw how deep the bruises went, how broken her legs were. He realized she might never walk again. The thought made his chest tighten, but he said nothing. He sat beside her through the night, keeping the fire alive, feeding her small spoonfuls of broth whenever she woke. As the storm howled outside, Luke watched her face in the firelight. There was something strong about her even in weakness. She wasn't just a chief's daughter. She had the look of someone born to lead, someone used to facing danger. Once, when she stirred in pain, she caught him staring. "You are not afraid of me?" she asked softly. He shook his head. I don't fear people who need help. She looked at him for a long time before closing her eyes again. For the first time since he'd found her, her face seemed peaceful. Luke leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him. As the fire crackled and the storm eased outside, the cabin filled with silence except for the faint sound of her breathing, steady now. By dawn, the snow had stopped. A pale light entered through the window, touching her face gently. Luke got up, added more wood to the fire, and checked her pulse. Her skin was warmer, her breathing stronger. He smiled slightly to himself, though he rarely smiled at all. She was alive. That was all that mattered. He stepped outside for a moment. The valley lay buried under snow, silent and untouched. He knew someone from her tribe would come looking soon. They'd see the tracks and know who took her. He didn't care. He had done what needed to be done. When he went back inside, she was awake, watching him quietly. You risked much, she said. They will not thank you for this, Luke shrugged. Didn't do it for thanks. She looked at him with confusion again, as if trying to understand what kind of man would risk everything for someone he didn't know. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He just went on tending the fire, pretending not to notice how her eyes followed him wherever he moved. That morning, as snow melted slowly on the window ledge, Luke Tanner realized something had changed inside him. For years he had lived like a shadow, cold and alone, speaking to no one. But now, as he watched the paralyzed daughter of the Apache chief rest safely under his roof, something in his quiet heart began to stir again. Something he thought he had lost forever. The simple human need to care. The days after the storm passed slowly. The air outside was still cold, but the sky had turned clear. Luke Tanner spent most of his time inside the cabin, taking care of the young woman he had saved. Her name was Lena, though she told him that only after she began to trust him. At first, she spoke little, her pride too strong to show weakness. But Luke noticed the pain in her eyes whenever she tried to move her legs. He built a small wooden frame beside the bed, tying strips of cloth to help her sit upright. Each day he helped her stretch her arms and shoulders so she would not grow weaker. Her legs, however, stayed still. Sometimes she cried when she thought he wasn't looking. Luke pretended not to notice, but his heart ached for her. Every morning he would bring in fresh water, cook simple food, and feed the fire. When she refused to eat, he sat beside her quietly until she did. She asked him once, "Why do you not send me away? You owe me nothing." He looked at her and said, "Because leaving someone alone to suffer is not the way I was raised." The days turned into a quiet routine. Luke spoke little, but his actions showed care. He brushed her long hair gently to keep it from tangling. He told small stories from his past, never too much, but enough to make her forget her pain for a while. He spoke of the time he rode across Texas chasing a runaway herd, and how Dusty, his old horse, had saved him more than once. Lena listened in silence, her dark eyes soft in the firelight. Sometimes she would tell him about her people. She spoke of her father, the great chief who led their tribe, and how she once rode wild horses before the accident took that away. She said she missed the sound of drums at night and the laughter of children by the river. Luke didn't say much, but one evening he went outside and brought in a small wooden flute he had carved years ago. He played it softly, the melody simple but full of feeling. Lena listened with closed eyes, and for the first time she smiled. Winter slowly began to fade. The snow melted, revealing patches of brown earth and wild grass. Luke started taking Lena outside in the sunlight, carrying her to a chair he built by hand. She loved feeling the warmth on her face again. He helped her move her legs one at a time, urging her to try. "Don't give up," he would say. "Even small steps count." Her frustration often grew, and she would turn her face away, ashamed of her weakness. But Luke never gave up on her. One morning, while Luke was chopping wood outside, he saw dust rising on the far trail. His sharp eyes noticed riders, many of them. He knew instantly who they were. The chief's men had found her. He hurried inside and told Lena. She looked afraid but not surprised. "They will think you stole me," she whispered. "They will kill you." Luke checked his rifle but left it by the wall. "Let them come," he said calmly. Soon 10 Apache riders surrounded the cabin. Their leader, tall and broad-shouldered, dismounted with fury in his eyes. It was her father, Chief Noka. He stormed into the cabin, spear in hand. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded. But the moment he saw her, His anger turned into disbelief. Lena was standing, or trying to. Her hands held tight to the wooden frame Luke had built. Her legs shook, her face pale, but she stood. "Father," she said softly, "this man saved me." The chief froze. His eyes filled with tears as he stepped closer. He touched her shoulder as if afraid she might vanish. "They said you would never walk again," he whispered. She nodded weakly. "He carried me through the storm. He gave me hope." The men behind the chief looked at Luke with shock. No one expected to see their princess alive, let alone standing. The chief turned to Luke, his expression heavy with pride and respect. "You risked your life for my blood," he said. "Why?" Luke met his eyes without fear. "Because she needed help," he said simply. For a long moment the room was silent. Then the chief bowed his head. "You are a man of honor. My tribe will never forget this." They stayed at the cabin for 2 more days while Lena regained strength. The tribe's healer helped with herbs and medicine. The men repaired the broken fence, brought food, and thanked Luke in quiet ways. When it was time to leave, the chief invited Luke to come to their camp. At first he refused, saying he wasn't one of them. But Lena looked at him with pleading eyes. "Please come," she said. "You are part of this now." So he went. At the camp, the tribe welcomed him with warmth. They offered him food and a place to rest. Children followed him around, amazed by his quiet strength. Luke fixed their wagons, repaired tools, and treated everyone with kindness. The people soon saw he wasn't just a cowboy. He was a man who lived by his word. Weeks passed, and Lena's progress surprised everyone. With daily practice, she learned to walk again, leaning first on a stick, then without it for a few steps. Each time she fell, Luke was there to lift her up. When she finally walked across the camp alone, the whole tribe cheered. Her father lifted his hands to the sky in gratitude. That night, they lit a great fire and celebrated her recovery. As the fire burned, the chief stood before his people. "This man," he said, pointing to Luke, "has shown courage greater than many warriors." When all others turned away, he rode into the storm. "When death surrounded my daughter, he carried her through. He is now our brother." The people shouted in approval, and Luke, though not used to such praise, nodded humbly. Later that night, as the camp grew quiet, Luke walked toward the river. Lena followed, walking slowly but steady. They stood side by side under the stars. "You could leave now," she said. "You have done your part." He looked at her, his face calm but eyes full of warmth. "Maybe," he said, "but I don't feel like leaving." She smiled faintly. "Then stay. My father would be proud to call you friend." For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of the river filled the silence. Finally, she said, "You once told me you don't fear those who need help. I think you helped yourself too, Luke Tanner." He turned to her, surprised. She added softly, "You were lonely when you found me. But now you are not." Luke didn't answer, but she was right. He had lived in silence for years, buried under his own memories. Saving her had changed that. In helping her heal, he had found a reason to live again. When morning came, Luke prepared to ride back to his ranch. The chief and his men gathered to say farewell. Lena stood beside her father, walking carefully but proudly. "Will you come back?" she asked. He smiled gently. "If you need me, you know where to find me." As he rode away, she watched until he vanished into the hills. The wind carried his name softly across the valley, and she whispered it once under her breath. Months later, when spring arrived, a lone rider was often seen visiting the Apache camp. Some said he came to trade. Others said he came to see someone special. No one knew for sure. But those who saw them together by the river, talking, laughing, and walking side by side, knew one thing for certain. The cowboy who had once lived alone had found his place again, not in the town or the mountains, but in the hearts of the people he had once saved. And the chief's daughter, who had once been paralyzed and forgotten, now walked beside him with strength and peace. Together they had proven that kindness and courage could cross any boundary, even between two worlds once divided by fear.